presentation for the whole of our festival, Inside Out, and this is one that you really don't want to miss. I see some people have secured their seats this morning and they have not moved. So gut health has become a global phenomenon with probiotic supplements, personalised nutrition and wellness promises everywhere you look. But with all that hype, how do we know what really works for our own bodies? So in this keynote talk from the Gut Health Doctor, an easy to digest guide to health from the inside out, our speaker's going to cut through the noise and share what the science actually says. Expert, practical, evidence-based and budget-friendly tips you can start using today to care for your gut and your overall health. Dr. Megan Rossi is internationally recognised as an influential gut health specialist. She is a leading research fellow at King's College London, has actually come straight from there this morning, a registered dietitian and nutritionist with over 15 years of experience and holds an award-winning PhD in probiotics. In 2019, she established the Gut Health Clinic, leading a world-class team of gut specialist dietitians, and is the founder of the multi-award-winning food brand Bio & Me. She also launched a clinically proven range of supplements, Smart Strains, and is the best-selling author of several Sunday Times titles, including Eat More, Live Well, and How to Eat More Plants. It's a huge pleasure to welcome to the stage our keynote speaker, Dr. Megan Rossi.
So I'm going to talk to you about tapping into your inner potential. Now, obviously, given the name of this London First Festival, you probably know when I talk about your inner potential, I am talking about your gut health. Now, I think many of you in the audience know quite a lot about gut health, which is brilliant. But for those who are very new, I thought it's important to kind of highlight what actually is gut health, right? Because there's a festival named after the gut. But what it is scientifically, I don't think is often well kind of translated. So when we think of gut health, it is this 9-meter long tube that literally delivers food from entry all the way to exit. Now that 9 meters is incredibly important for 3 key reasons. Now this is when I'm going to bribe you. Who's going to get those 3 key reasons why I'm going to give it away. Gut health, that 9 meters is so important. So the first one, someone want to share? Your gut microbiome, absolutely, that is one of them. Second one, why that 9 meters is so important?
Digestion.
Perfect, digestion, absolutely. Many of you are eating now. Without good gut health, you couldn't get that food from your gut into your blood system. And the third one, what else lives along that 9-meter digestive tract? Yeah, so we've got the microbiome, the bacteria, we've got digestion, immunity. Brilliant. Okay, well you did quite a good job, and you are having a gut-loving soybean high fiber snack. So there is your every organ in the body, right? From our kidneys to our heart to our pancreas, etc. But given time, I'm just going to whiz through 5 areas just to highlight, I guess, the breadth of the science in the gut microbiome world. So the first one is the gut hormone axis, where there is fascinating research highlighting, particularly around estrogen, right? So one of the female-dominated hormones, where there's certain types of microbes in our gut that can turn inactive estrogen to active estrogen, right? And this is particularly important for anyone going through the menopause, where when our body uses estrogen, what happens when it gets old, it gets dumped into our gut. And if we don't have the right microbes, we would essentially poop that out. But with the right microbes, and the name is called the estrobolome, if you want to impress any of your friends, just say, I've got this estrobolome in me. These are the certain types of microbes that turn the inactive estrogen to active estrogen. That then gets back into your blood and recirculates it. So we're seeing so much potential about hormone regulation, and it's not just estrogen, progesterone and testosterone. We know our microbes are also playing a role in that too. The next one is anyone who's looking to hit a new PB at the gym. And this is around the gut muscle axis, where scientists have identified certain types of microbes that are very much exclusive to elite athletes. And these microbes are actually giving these people a competitive advantage, right? So when most of us go for a run, our body produces lactic acid, our muscles get sore and we have to stop, right? We're like, ugh, in so much pain, I'm really tired. Now, these certain types of microbes that lives in a lot of athletes' guts actually turn that lactic acid into energy. So not only do they not get the pain, but they get this additional energy boost that means they can run for longer. Another really exciting area. Then there is the gut gut-skin axis. Who's heard of the gut-skin axis before? Okay, about 20% of you, that's great. So we don't just have a gut microbiome, right? We've got a skin microbiome. We've got a vaginal or testicular microbiome, depending on our gender. So we've got all of these niches within us. And we know that the gut is really strongly communicating to our skin microbiome, which is like this protective layer. And therefore we're seeing a lot of research come out in inflammatory conditions like eczema and psoriasis, and how the gut and those skin microbes are constantly communicating there. The fourth one is around the gut metabolism connection, and I think with this whole rise in a lot of the weight loss drugs, the new kind of generation ones, we're kind of, people are looking to understand more about how this works. And what is so exciting is that one of the key mechanisms of how things like Ozempic work is by targeting the GLP-1 hormones. There's certain type of hormone that actually, when we eat certain types of nutrients and nourish our gut bacteria, our bacteria stimulate that exact same hormone. So if we're really just nourishing our microbiome, that's producing these hormones which keeps us fuller for longer and helps regulate our appetite and our weight management. So anyone looking for weight management tips, nourishing your gut is a really strong and effective place to start. And then finally there is the gut-brain axis. Now, the stats show that 1 in 4 of us are likely to have a mental health event each and every year. So I think this in particular is a really powerful kind of topic to identify how, again, nourishing those trillions of microbes can have significantly improvements in mental health. Now, is there any skeptics in the room about gut health? Is anyone game to like, yeah, you know what, I'm a bit of a skeptic because these microbes are isolated down here and the brain is up here, like how on earth could they be communicating? No one's game? Yeah, maybe a few people at the front? Well, you know what, I was actually a skeptic, right? So before, I did my PhD 15 years ago, I was like, oh, this hippy-dippy gut-brain connection, like, yeah, I can feel butterflies in my tummy, but like, that's where it ends sort of thing. But actually, we now scientifically understand the 3 ways in which the gut microbes and the brain are having that two-way dialogue, right? So the first one is via the immune system. So remember I said 70% of the immune system lives in the gut, right? So what happens if the microbes sense something's going on, they activate the immune system in the gut, that then produces inflammatory markers, and they go and talk to the brain to say, look, we need to start releasing this hormone or do this action. So that's the first one, which you kind of think of like an alarm system. The second pathway of communication is kind of like a mobile phone. The vagus nerve, who's heard of the vagus nerve? Yeah, okay, about 80% of you, very well read. So essentially that is like this communication highway, these nerves kind of zip messages between the two. So like I said, kind of mobile phone-like, where instant messages, the gut can talk to the brain that way. And then the third one is a good old postal service, where these microbes, when we eat our food, parts of the food that gets malabsorbed, those microbes start to eat away at it, produce chemicals which then get into our blood system, and some of them can pass that blood-brain barrier. So like it's a delivery service. So whenever you're thinking about how are these microbes talking, you think alarm system, mobile phone, and the postal service is the communication pathway there. Now, again, for any of the skeptics who don't want to be labeled as a skeptic, this was the first study from many years ago that actually changed my view and was like, wow, again, nourishing the microbiome can change what's happening up here. So it was a small study, but a very well-controlled study in women, which is very rare in the research realm because women are more complex to research. But essentially, all the women got at baseline this functional MRI. And that is me being a dummy of an MRI study we have at King's, where essentially they show you images and they scan your brain and look at what parts of your brain gets activated, right? So they did it to everyone at baseline. Then they randomized them to either getting this live bacteria yogurt. They got a kind of a placebo, so a yogurt but it hadn't had any live microbes and it hadn't been fermented, or no product at all. So they had each of these, whichever they were randomized to, every day for 4 weeks. Then they brought them back in and re-scanned their brain, showing them those negative images. And what they found uniquely in those who had those live microbes, actually they had a decrease in activation of the part of the brain associated with emotions, called the amygdala, suggesting these people would be more resilient to the negative kind of things that happen, getting that horrible email from work or being stuck in traffic. So that was kind of the first one where I was like, wow, actually, that's pretty impressive. This is changing functionality in our brain. And then the SMILES trial came out, and this, again, has since been repeated, so it's very robust in terms of the findings. But this is for anyone who's struggling with their mental health, and really powerful, where people had moderate to severe depression. So diagnosed depression, half of them got this gut boosting diet, and we'll talk at the end about what that exactly entailed. The other half got a befriending type of counselling. And that was really important that they both had the same amount of contact with the researchers to make sure, the benefit in this group was literally just because of the diet, not because of, the placebo effect. So they had the same number of sessions with the researcher for 12 weeks. Then they reassessed their mental health. And uniquely, in those who had the gut boosting diet group, over 30% of them had a significant improvement in their depression scores, which would have classified them as no longer clinically depressed. In the control group, the counselling group, that was only 8%. So I think, a 3-month intervention study just focusing on diet can have these really clinically meaningful improvements in depression. And of course, it's not just, poor mental health, it's things like, performance as well. We know that nourishing the microbiome has been shown again to increase alertness and performance. So yeah, at this stage, hopefully everyone's thinking, oh gee, how is my gut healthy? How do I know if it's healthy? Because clearly it's going to give you that extra edge in life. So when I was writing the first book, because this is literally the question I get asked all the time, like, okay, I know it's important, but how do I know where my gut health stands? I went through, hundreds of different clinical papers and came up with this 10-question assessment. So if you've got your phone on you, you can scan it, absolutely free just to complete, and it scales your gut health from a score of 0 to 20. And what I get people to do is do that before they start to change anything in their diet. And we'll talk about some of these dietary strategies in the final 5 minutes. But essentially, you do that at baseline, so you know what your score is, then you change your diet and lifestyle to really nourish your microbiome, then you repeat the score to see how your score has changed. And I think that can be really motivating and empowering for people, because you're not going to change your diet and 3 days later feel like a new person. It's a slow, gradual change that usually takes around 4 to 8 weeks, right? So having a quantitative assessment gives you kind of that validation of how things have changed. Now let's move on to nutrition for the gut. So the important thing about what's actually happening. Now when I was studying nutrition 20 or so years ago, we got very much taught that diet could impact disease risk, right? But that was all through human metabolism, so how the food was affecting the human cells. So we knew that. There was a lot of unanswered questions because we were like, well, some foods are really beneficial, but it's not really impacting human metabolism. And certain additives we thought, oh, they don't seem to have good health outcomes, but they're not interacting with humans. So why are we missing out on some of the picture here? And now we've discovered why. Because food doesn't just impact human metabolism, it feeds the microbes as well. And therefore there's this whole new pathway of how food can impact not only disease risk, but also health prevention and kind of happiness as well. So I think that's a really exciting space of why food has become even more important. So I nearly gave away the answer. What is our gut microbe's favorite nutrient? This is for a book, the final book. Oh look, straight onto it, I love that. So absolutely. So remember that 9-meter long digestive tract, right? So fiber can't get digested in that small intestine, unlike the protein and the fats and most other carbs, right? Because human cells don't have the enzymes. So we've always known people who ate more fiber lived longer, were happier, all that sort of thing. We never understood why, because we're like, humans can't digest it. So is it because they have a more effective bowel movement, therefore they feel happier? But now we understand why, because the microbes are the only ones in our body that have the enzymes to break that fiber down. So it goes through most of our digestive tract unabsorbed. It makes its way to that last 1.5 meters where the microbes have those enzymes. They break it down, they produce these amazing chemicals which then get into our blood and communicate with the rest of our body. So that's part of that postal service. Remember the alarm system, the mobile phone and the postal service? So that is how the postal surface is working. The microbes eating the fiber, producing chemicals, and having those far-reaching benefits. So you can see that there, there's these words called short-chain fatty acids. Again, if you want to impress your friends, that's the kind of communication molecules the microbes are then sending literally to every organ and having different messages and pathways there. Now, really just to hit home the power of fibre, I think the government has, highlighted we're not getting enough fibre. I think a lot of people think it's quite boring, but actually it can be really powerful. So for every 8 grams increase in fibre per day, the statistics show on a population level we can reduce things like, heart disease by 20%, type 2 diabetes by 15%, and colon cancer by nearly 10% as well. And that's just 8 grams of fibre, which equals a large potato with the skin on. That's 8 grams of fibre. Some veggie sticks and hummus, or some beans. Now in clinic, a lot of people will go, gosh, I know that will help me feel better, but that it looks so boring. I just can't face that. And I get it, right? We want to enjoy our food. It's not about deprivation. But actually, with a few different little tweaks, these recipes on the left actually have got 16, double the amount of fibre in it. So it actually is much easier than we think to add the fibre into our meals. But of course, it's not just about fibre. Otherwise, we'd all take a fibre supplement and we'd feel like superheroes. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. It's because not only is there close to 100 different types of fibres, which unfortunately we can't get in supplements, but each different plant contains an array of different types of plant chemicals. So take the humble old apple, right? It's got over 300 plant chemicals. We call them phytochemicals, including things like inositol, which we know has got support for PCOS, and things like dopamine, the feel-good hormone, and that's just a boring apple. So if you extrapolate that out to all the other plants, you start to appreciate how powerful plant diversity really can be. And then of course there is the fermented foods, right? So does anyone make fermented foods at home? I know Mr. Pickle at the back certainly does. Amazing. So this is making kefir. So here is the translucent ones, there's water kefir, the cloudy ones is dairy kefir. Now it's so easy to make. Get some of those grains, pop it into a glass of milk, and what happens is that not only do those microbes start to kind of grow, and therefore they have higher amounts, but why fermented foods are so powerful is because of this very scientific diagram, which essentially just means fermented foods is about so much more than the bacteria, right? Because during that process where the bacteria eat the milk sugars, they actually do a lot of other things, right? So they change the protein in milk to these bioactives, and those bioactives have been shown to do things like reduce blood pressure, which is why fermented dairy's got much better health outcomes than just your standard dairy. So fermented foods can be really powerful for those extra bioactives that are produced, short chain fatty acids, those communication molecules we mentioned, and also anyone struggling with lactose intolerance. Fermented dairy like kefir actually contains around 30% less lactose because the microbes have eaten a lot of that lactose. Just quickly touching on fermented foods versus probiotics, because I think this is one of the most common questions I get asked, is they're interchangeable, right? Or they're kind of like the same thing, but actually they're very, very different. So we think about fermented foods, think about them as being very much a generalist. So for general gut health, increasing the different types of microbes and overall kind of health profile, fermented foods is the way to go, not a probiotic supplement, right? But that's not to say probiotic supplements don't have a role. We know that probiotic supplements can be very specialist, so they can help for specific conditions and specific issues. And just to, I guess, reiterate about the world of probiotics, right? So there was an amazing guy called Metchnikoff, where he was the first one to come up with this concept of why don't we replace the bad microbes with the good microbes, right? Makes sense. Now that was very innovative for his time. But let's fast forward all of the science, literally 50,000 scientific papers on probiotics. We now know that concept is very outdated. So like I said, there's no point taking a probiotic for your general gut health. Have the fermented foods. All of the health bodies and scientists, which is quite nice because scientists don't always agree on topics, are all saying the same things, that probiotics are very strain specific. And I like to liken it to the analogy of vitamins and minerals, right? So if you have iron deficiency, you wouldn't go and take a vitamin D supplement, would you? Because they're different nutrients. The same goes with probiotics. We need to get very specific as to the strain, i.e. the different type of bacteria that you're taking. So just to kind of look a little bit further, if we're being more specific around bacteria, we need to understand how they're named. So who's heard of bifidobacteria before? Yeah, good, about another 70% of you. So there's close to 200 different types of bifidobacteria, right? So if you were just like, oh, I'm just going to take a bifidobacteria, you wouldn't really know which one you're having. Even at the species level of the bacteria, again, many different types. So in order to really identify the individual function of what they're doing, you need to think about the strain level. And you can liken it again to the animal kingdom. So if you're looking to get a dog, you don't just want to get any dog, you need to make sure you're getting the right strain of dog that matches you and your family, right? Like the Chihuahua versus Rottweiler, very different. So that's one of the key concepts. So just to highlight finally on the immune system, right? So when we are thinking about the specificity of probiotics and the strains, this was a clinical trial, backed by several other health bodies. And what they showed is there is good evidence for specific strains of bacteria to protect you from cold and flu. And just to highlight that in the study in particular, so this one first was infants, where they gave the specific strains of bacteria, BB12 and LDG combined, versus placebo, so that's a fake intervention, right? So the infants didn't, or the parents didn't know which intervention they were on, fake intervention or the specific strains. And during the first 12 months of the baby's lives, those who had those specific strains of bacteria had a 50% reduction of respiratory tract infections, like cold and flu, right? And again, the same strains in adults this time, randomized placebo-controlled trial showing those who had those specific strains actually had a reduction in cold and flu duration by 2 days and severity of symptoms by over 30% if they did get unwell. So again, it shows the power of probiotics when used in a very specific way. So when we are thinking about probiotics, think the right strain, right time, right way, which is why I developed Smart Strains, and you can see us over there if you want to learn more about the targeted effects of live bacteria supplements. So let's move on to the key take-homes. This is where I want you to wake up. If you're not into the science, this is when it's about the translation. So if you think about all of the science, the complex world, it funnels down at the moment to these 4 key principles. If you do these, you will then be tapping into your inner potential. So the first one is mostly plants. And when I say mostly plants, it's not just your boring fruit and veg, right? So we're actually doing a clinical trial at King's, which I mentioned to you, Catherine, where we're starting to explore this in more detail around the kind of the different types of plants and the fibers they're offering. So whenever you're thinking about plants, think of the Super 6. So 6 different plant-based food groups. And you might want to today think, have I had something from the Super 6 already, or do I need to add something? So they're your whole grains, your nuts and seeds, your fruit, your veg, your legumes, so things like your chickpeas, butter beans, and your herbs and your spices. And the good news for those who are like, I get plants are healthy, just can't handle the taste. There are clinical trials showing you can actually sneak them into your diet or your kids' diet or your family's diet, and actually it changes not only their taste preferences, but their oral microbiome. So you get microbes in there as well. So if they don't think they like plants, sneak them in, things like frozen cauliflower into a smoothie, and after around 4 to 6 weeks, they'll actually become more plant loving. So a little hack for anyone who's got a tricky family. The second principle feeds on from the mostly plants to diversity all the way. So we touched on the importance of diversity, and people have probably heard this like magical 30 number, have the 30 plants a week. And I think that's more of an arbitrary kind of target, but this is what it essentially would look like if you did across the Super 6. Now I appreciate many of you are probably thinking, oh God, that looks like I'm gonna have to quit my job, like I'm gonna have to, spend extra money, but it's so much more simple than that. Literally, whenever you're at the supermarket, think diversity. So don't just get your, one type of veg, get your multi-pack of stir-fry veg. Don't just get one type of berry, get your 3 berry type. Same with your legumes, same with your granola. You can see my biome there, again, 16 different plant points, as well as your nuts and your seeds, right? So it's so easy to make these switches, no extra cost or time, yet you're getting all of those extra phytochemicals in it. The third one is going for whole and not refined, and this is based on our clinical trial at King's, so world first clinical trial. We've literally just about to publish the results, and what we found was emulsifiers, which are found in thousands of foods that we eat on a daily basis. So if you've eaten anything out of a packet, there's a chance over the last couple of days you certainly had a couple of emulsifiers. And we know that, food additives have been approved as safe, so I'm not doing this fear-mongering thing. But the 400 or so food additives were all kind of classified as safe before we understood about our gut microbes, right? So one of the things our team at King's did is looked at the safety of these emulsifiers, now knowing about our gut microbiome. So I'm not going to bore you with the details because we've got short on time, but essentially it was people with an autoimmune condition, Crohn's disease, right? Half of them got emulsifiers, half of them didn't get emulsifiers, and those who had the emulsifier-free diet had a significant improvement in their inflammatory levels in their gut, right? So I think what we need to kind of brace ourselves for is this concept of, again, we don't have to cut out all ultra-processed foods, we can still have treats, but just think about the percentage, because perhaps some of these additives might not be as great for us as historically we thought. So, making bulk cooking a batch of veggie patties once a month and then freezing them instead of buying kind of the vegan patties you might get in the supermarket, it's probably going to be much better for your overall gut health in the long term. And the fourth and final principle is your fermented foods. Right, so all the different weird and wacky ones, but also things like live yogurt and quality aged cheeses also count towards that. And we highlighted this not just because of those live microbes, right? Fermented foods are so much more powerful than those bacteria. And in fact, to leave you with one final study from Stanford University, what they did is put people on a high fermented food diet and showed not only did it increase the different types of microbes in their gut, which essentially means they had more skills and power within them, but also decreased inflammatory markers in their blood as well. So really powerful technique. So this is an opportunity to take a snap on your phone and think to yourself, okay, over the next 3 months, which of these key areas are you going to target? And I would recommend just focusing on one per month, right? Are you going to be thinking, okay, I need to make sure I have the Super 6 every day? Or actually, are you going to be trying to hit that 30 plus plant points? Maybe it's watching the percent of the ultra processed foods, or perhaps it's really focusing on that fermented food group. Whatever it is, add it on, right? So choose one, second month, choose a second one, and then repeat that gut health questionnaire and see how your score changes over around a 3-month period. Thank you all very much, and I think if Catherine doesn't get angry at me, I've got 5 minutes of questions.
Okay. So thank you, Megan. That was absolutely fantastic, and some really good practical tips to take away for us all to action immediately with our lunch. So chance for questions for anyone who'd like to ask a question.
Yes, your blood type matter.
Oh, very good. Oh, I think we've got one question here, but no, blood type, unfortunately, it historically was something people were looking at, but our blood type doesn't seem to dictate our types of our gut health or our gut microbes. But good question.
Because we have the QR code back. Some people are asking
yes,
for that.
Yeah.
Soft drinks, I'm guessing they're not the best for the microbiome, but they're full of sugar and even anything stronger than that. How do you come out of that cycle of the so-called pleasure of the sugar and the ups and downs of all of that?
Yeah, look, I totally get that. And a little secret for you, I used to be addicted to Coke Zero, right? So obviously it doesn't have the sugar in it, but it's got the artificial sweeteners. And the World Health Organization has actually come out with a statement saying that these non-sugar sweeteners, so things like aspartame, sucralose, but even things like stevia, they no longer support that we have them for weight management or reducing our risk of chronic conditions, right? So I think they're discovering that it's kind of a case of we can't have our cake and eat it too with these sweeteners to get all that sweetness. And also in clinic, I see that people rely on these sweeteners, they then start to crave more sweetness in their diet, right? So it can be quite a vicious cycle. So the way that I kind of got out of this Coke Zero addiction was actually switching, and it's such an important one. Whatever your favorite thing is, if it's not great for you, think about, can you switch it for something else, right? So things like kombucha, traditionally fermented kombucha, just check again, they don't contain any sweeteners. In fact, the lady from Twist, I know you have a great kombucha product where it literally doesn't contain these artificial sweeteners, which unfortunately some people are starting to sneak into things like kombucha. And then there's other brands that like Aqua Libra, where essentially it's just soda water with some natural flavorings. That can be another great way to switch it. And then you can think of those switches, same goes with ice cream, right? Some ice cream every now and then is great, but what I find is some frozen berries with some kefir on top of it, smush it around, takes 1 minute, just like the back of a spoon, turns into like this delicious ice cream. So always when we're habit changing is switching things and not ditching them.
In order to improve the nation's diet, aren't you going to have to do something about the state of the nation's teeth?
That's probably a very valid question, because yeah, we see it actually. One of the things in older people is that there's a decline in their gut bacterial diversity. But actually, that's not necessarily something that needs to happen due to age. Why we think it's happening is because of the dentures, right? Exactly. So a really great point where people aren't chewing the high fiber foods, they're having the white toast because it dissolves in the mouth and therefore easier to digest. So that's a really great point, and I think when we're looking at these the studies of our microbiome in aging, our microbiome doesn't need to decrease in diversity due to actual fundamental, aging issues until 80 years of age. So up until then, we should still be able to have a very diverse microbiome if we look after our teeth and are able to choose those higher fiber foods. You hold on to that extra, and also there's going to be exceptions. So you could be the exception. You could be the sanitarian that has the best gut microbiome diversity.
Thanks so much for your talk. I have a question about caesarean section and breastfeeding. So with regard to caesarean section, when do you think the gut microbiota recovers? I mean, I've heard 2 years, but does it recover? And with regard to breastfeeding, how do we get that simple message out so people think it's worth it?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's such an important topic, and I couldn't agree more. So for those who aren't necessarily acquainted with what happens during the delivery process, if you have a baby vaginally, what happens is the baby gets inoculated not just from the mum's vaginal microbiome, but also their fecal microbiome, where most women don't want to talk about it, but there is some stool that, when they're pushing out the baby, gets mixed with the baby. So we know that vaginally delivered babies have a more diverse microbiome and therefore seem to be protected from a number of different allergies and chronic conditions as they age. But of course, C-sections do need to happen. They can be life-saving, really important. But those babies seem to have a less diverse microbiome. It mimics more of the skin microbiome. So there is some really cool research looking at vaginal seeding. If you have to have a C-section, and actually for my second baby, I took a vaginal seeding pack into the hospital with me in case there was any emergency, where again, I wouldn't recommend anyone do it unless they're, this is their space, so they're an expert in that, or talk to your team, but you can get these little swabs where you can swab your vaginal microbiome in the back end, and if you have the C-section, you wipe it over your baby to inoculate them, trying to mimic that vaginal delivery. But what if you didn't get the chance to do that? Like you said, the baby's microbiome can kind of get back to the level of a vaginally delivered baby by probably around 3 months if mum's able to breastfeed. So like you highlighted, breastfeeding is incredibly important. It's incredibly hard, particularly women who need to go back to work quickly or are struggling with latching, all that sort of stuff. So I wouldn't I don't want to make people feel guilty if they can't breastfeed, but equally it is game changing because there's a large portion of breast milk which is literally prebiotics, which feeds the gut bacteria. So the baby can't digest it. The only thing it can feed is the baby's gut microbiome. And then it contains things like the antibodies to build their immune system, probiotics in breast milk as well, all different types, much more than you ever get in a capsule, again, to really inoculate that. So breastfeeding is so important, and yeah, if we could get an initiative out there to land better, because I think there is that fine line between guilt tripping parents, but then educating them, empowering them. So yeah, it's a very tricky one to kind of move forward, isn't it?
I would just be interested to know about plant protein versus animal and fish protein and how each affects the microbiome.
Yeah, very good.
Because I'm imagining the plant protein has probably got the fibre, but just be interested to know if there's a sort of balance.
Yeah, exactly. So if we're thinking about the different proteins in the whole form, right? So if we're getting protein from a chickpea or we're getting protein from a piece of steak, right? Not only is the protein, the amino acids going to be slightly different, but one will have the fiber. So if we are in that context, we know that the protein with the fiber is going to be much better. And in fact, one of the things I looked at in my PhD was the protein fiber index. And we showed that protein on its own, because we know having too much protein actually, we can't absorb it too much in our small intestine, and we lump it in our gut and the bacteria ferment it and they produce these potential toxins. So a really high fiber diet isn't great for our microbiome. But actually what was better is if we added fiber on top of that. So if you need to have a high protein diet for whatever reason, a lot of not just athletes but clinical reasons, adding the fiber to that can actually really protect, because the microbes then eat the fiber instead of producing those toxins from the protein. So we know in its whole form, the plant sources of protein is going to be better. But if we're looking at these refined proteins, like the protein powders, which the fiber's been stripped out of, and then the dairy proteins, where again they're kind of matched just for the amino acids, they had the same impact on the gut microbiome. So yeah, that's kind of the take home, is adding protein and fiber together is ideal, but if it's just isolated protein from plants, it's going to have the same effect on the gut, which is probably not a great one if you're having large amounts.
And would you just welcome me in just giving her a last round?